Well, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Today is class outside day. We'll see how it goes, and hopefully the noise won't be too bad. I'm probably only about a mile and a half from our actual classroom as the crow flies in my backyard, which I can maybe show you a little bit of the backyard. You probably can't see it too well, but we have a 2/3 of an acre backyard right over behind Panera on Popper Level. At any rate, it's always nice to be outdoors. I hope you all are getting a chance to enjoy the weather. Today we take up the final book in our in our course, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. As I say in the notes, this is an extraordinary book. And if somebody wants to know, outside of the title obviously, what the book is all about, in one word, it's suffering. Now, the period that we're in, obviously, which nobody ever would have dreamt of a year ago, 6 months ago, even a couple of months ago, that we would be in this kind of a situation, that I would be actually giving you video lectures. Nobody ever dreamt of this. And so certainly there are a lot of elements that are universal right now, actually in terms of the whole world, that constitute suffering. But most of the time when we talk about this book, though, I ask you, each one of you as an individual, to focus on something in your life that constitutes unavoidable suffering. We all have it. We all have something. For some it might be relatively mild. For some it is much more severe. It could range anywhere from a loss of a loved one. It could be a physical injury. It could be an uptick in anxiety attacks. It could be the loss of a job. It could be, as it is now, just sort of a very general uncertainty about life. As you look through, as you read this book, and as you start out, obviously, with the foreword, and as you look at the preface to the 1992 edition, and as you begin the actual essay, the first essay, which is called Experiences in a Concentration Camp, which begins on page 3, keep in mind this reality, whatever it is in your own life that constitutes suffering. We're not studying Viktor Frankl's book because we're studying the Holocaust or the death camps or concentration camps, all of which are very worthy studies. We're studying Viktor Frankl's book, obviously, here in a philosophy class, and we're looking at, in a sense you might say, the connections between our psychological realities and our philosophical realities. We're looking at how those two intersect. We're looking at why, in one sense, as I've said to many people over the years, philosophy can be the best therapy. Now, where does Viktor Frankl fit in terms of the kinds of philosophers that we have studied so far? First of all, he's an existentialist. The original title of this book was called From Death Camp to Existentialism. If you look at the opposite side of the title page, you will see that original title indicated both in German and in English. So Viktor Frankl does take up those themes of existentialism that we saw previously, especially the theme of freedom. But certainly he's looking at the theme of the individual, the existing individual, and he is also looking at the theme of passions. But one of Frankl's big focal points is freedom. You'll see, even actually in the foreword, you already see that Frankl is fond of quoting Nietzsche in just a couple of short phrases and in a couple of ways. And the one quote from Nietzsche, I think, is crucial to getting anybody through, in a philosophical way, whatever suffering it is that we are experiencing. So Frankl fits into that category of an existentialist. He's also very similar to Socrates and Plato in that he looks at the world as it is. He looks at the world in terms of what we can't change versus what we can change. So it's a very valuable book, and I think it draws together a lot of what we've studied so far. The first half of the book, as I've mentioned, is his actual essay, which was written, I think he says, in a day and a half, about his experiences in a concentration camp. The second half of the book is a little bit of a psychiatric explanation of the ideas that he only hints at in the first part of the book. Now, although you might find the second part of the book a little bit more challenging to read, I highly encourage you to give it a shot. And when we get to our latter classes on Frankl, I'll point out to you some very important areas that you can focus on in order to get what it is that he's trying to say in the second half. For now, however, you'll notice that I've given you a few questions, which, as I mentioned to you, you should be able to answer. And if you can answer those questions, you can get a very crucial and even to some extent complete explanation of what Frankl is trying to get across. So what is your suffering? What is your meaning? Right? How is it that you personally make your suffering meaningful? What is your why? Right? What is it that's going to get you through what you have to go through? Right? As the author of the foreword, Harold Kushner, mentions very early on page Roman numeral 10, sometimes we encounter in life forces beyond our control that can take away, seemingly, everything that we possess except one thing, and that's our freedom to choose how we will respond to that situation. Well, we're in a good example of that right now. Most of us are in a situation of diminished activity, right? We may have found out that our hobbies were going out to eat, going out to visit with friends, and going to the grocery store. And you can't really do much of that anymore, right? But we still, this is going to be Frankl's crucial point, we still have the freedom to choose how we will deal with it. We can deal with it in good ways or sometimes in not so good ways. Frankl himself would probably not be surprised at the kind of situation that we find ourselves in now. He would probably not be surprised that people are finding themselves in, obviously not a concentration camp type of situation, but in something analogous where their normal freedom of movement is very, very limited, where they have to sort of reorient certain aspects of their lives. And, I did make one misstatement just a few moments ago. I said he wrote the book in a day and a half. Actually, he says he wrote it in 9 successive days. He's talking on page Roman numeral 14. He wrote the book in 9 successive days, and originally, as he states there, it was supposed to be published anonymously, but some people talked him out of that. But there's a very important point that I want to make sure you notice at the bottom of that same page, Roman numeral 14. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. Because success, like happiness, must ensue. It can't be pursued. And it only comes about, he says, as an unintended side effect. That might sound strange to some of you, especially you're in college, you're looking at ways in which you can be successful in life. But I hear this over and over again. I just went through an entire weekend of a business conference. I hear this over and over again, that you can't make your own individual, almost selfish focus on success your focus. You have to make your service to your customers, and your customers here could be your vendors or your end users or your actual customers. You have to make your focus on their success what you do. And if you do that, then yes, the likelihood is that you will be financially rewarded. Right? So the same thing Frankl is saying holds true in every area of life. Right? You can't focus on something that is going to have to come about in the process of your performing other tasks which will be beneficial to people. Right? An unintended side effect, he says, of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. This does not have to mean in all cases a otherworldly cause, right? It could mean, for example, right now, a cause of reaching out to people and checking in on them and taking care of yourself and trying to stay as isolated as possible during this particular trial, right? But notice what he says. Next page, Roman numeral 15. Success will follow you precisely because you have forgotten to think about it. Don't think about succeeding all the time. Live your life. Be of service to others, right? Now, is that difficult when you are suffering? Of course it is. That's precisely his point. One of the most important ways to get out of our own suffering is not to focus on it, but to focus on somebody else. And oftentimes what that means is focusing on someone else's suffering, right? Now there's a very touching story that Kushner tells at the very end of his, well actually no, this is Frankl, I'm sorry. This is a very touching story that Frankl tells at the end of his preface. And it starts at the bottom of page Roman numeral 15 and goes over to the top of Roman numeral 16. He had a visa to come to the United States, and he could escape from the coming Nazi onslaught and what he knew would be imprisonment in the concentration camp. But he knew that if he took advantage of that visa, that his parents would be left alone and would be taken to the concentration camp, most likely that he would be able to do nothing to help them at all. So he's visiting his parents. He sees, as he says, a piece of marble lying on a table. It came from a synagogue. He asked his father what it was, and his father said, well, it's there's some writing on it that indicates one of the 10 commandments. And when Frankl asked his father which commandment, it was the commandment that says, honor thy father and thy mother. And so Frankl knew at that point that he would not use the visa, that he would stay and do whatever it was that he could, which actually turned out not to be all that much, but he would stay and do whatever he could to try to help his parents during this extremely difficult time with the rise of Nazism. So here's a book written by an individual who went through an experience that most people did not survive. And while he was going through this experience, he was actually able to think and then later to record pretty deep philosophical reflections about this experience. But as you read through the main part of the essay, one of the things that you will notice is that every prisoner, including Frankl himself, had to make it through each day, one day at a time. The only rival that I can think to tell you about in terms of a book like this is a novel by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, if I'm pronouncing the Russian names correctly. And that is also a very moving depiction of it's a fictional sort of collage of events of one day in the life of a prisoner in a Russian communist Siberian camp. And there too, you get some of the same elements that you get in Frankl. So if you're interested in, say, are there any other books like this that are out there, take a look at actually anything that Solzhenitsyn's ever written, but One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Now, the first assignment only has you going up to page 20 in the book. I want to make sure that you pay close attention to what Frankl marks out on page 8. And it is there where he notes 3 phases of each prisoner's experience. Right? So immediately there's the period of capture. There's the period of time when, and you can think about this again in terms of your own suffering, at the period of time where you say to yourself, this can't be happening. This is some sort of a bad dream, or this will be over, or I just can't believe it. And Frankl refers to it as the delusion of reprieve. But think about it, say you have a car wreck and you sustain an injury. Well, the very first thought that's going to come into your mind is, I can't believe this is happening. This can't be happening right now. Sort of like us, somebody asked me the very day that school was dismissed, very day, one of my other classes, somebody asked you, do you think we'll close? And my only answer was, well, I don't know, but I hope not. Well, we now see why we had to close, and the email came out that very same day, March 11th, at 2 p.m. So, but up until that point, I think, many of us had a delusion of reprieve. Oh, this can't be so bad that we'll actually have to cancel classes. And then at first it's just for a couple of weeks. Remember, we were going to come back at the end of March, but we still had that delusion of reprieve. We still thought it was going to be over relatively soon, but that didn't happen. Now we're in for the long haul. And while our school situation doesn't last all that much longer, if you're in grade school or high school, it's going to last probably, well, at least until the end of May, usually through June. So it's going to be much longer. And schools, in fact, may not go back. Any school anywhere may not go back this academic year at all. So that's phase number 1, the phase following the immediate happening, whether it's a death or a physical injury or a new psychological experience or a new illness or, say, a cancer diagnosis or something like that. That the emotion, Frankl says, that is most associated with that is shock. You can't believe it. Then you realize it really has happened. You realize there is no reprieve. And then Frankl says we experience in his example is called the long period of imprisonment. This is sort of where we are now with our present sort of coronavirus situation, right? We're in the long period of imprisonment. We realize it's not a bad dream. It's not going to be over with quickly. And here, Frankl says, the main emotion which is coming into play is apathy. You reach a point, and we've all reached this point to some extent, where the passions, and this is the existentialist focused on the passions, but the passions are just not very intense. You just don't care as much. You just, okay, I can't go to the grocery, I can't go out to eat, I can't go play sports with my friends. So many things that I was accustomed to doing on a regular basis, I can't do anymore, and you become very apathetic. One of the analogies that Frankl uses in a different part of the book is a person who's unemployed for a long period of time and doesn't know whether or not gainful employment is going to come back, and you become very discouraged, and when you become discouraged, you become apathetic. Finally, the third period, which Frankl mentions, is the period of liberation, where the camps were open, the thing was over. And here he says something which is kind of puzzling, because you would think that when your suffering is over, whatever it is, if it can be over, some suffering can't be over, but in the case of the camps, in the case of what we're going through now, yes, it will be over someday. But Frankl notes that a lot of times that period of liberation is not really marked by joy and happiness, but rather by bitterness and disillusionment. And we'll see why when we get to that actual point. But I want to make sure that you're aware of those three phases that Frankl points out. Now then, there are a lot of other points of this which if I was going to keep talking for another 20 minutes, I would point out to you. But I don't want to make these videos quite that long. So I'm going to end this one in a minute. I will be giving you each time at least one, maybe more, videos of Viktor Frankl himself speaking. And I encourage you very highly to look at those. I also encourage you very highly, obviously, to read these pages carefully. These questions go through chronologically in the book. So these are attempts, as I gave you at the very beginning of the Republic, sort of like a reading guide. Now I don't know if we're going to have this all the way through, right? So you can pick up on this and read for yourself, and I'll point out some highlights to you. But read the book very carefully. I always tell people that once you've read the book, don't get rid of this book. Don't sell it. Put it away. Put it in a drawer where you're going to forget about it. Put it in with your socks, and then discover it 5 years from now. Read it again, because you'll be in a different place. Your suffering in your life will be different. Then after you've read it again and reflected on it, put it away again. And read it every 5 or 10 years. Read it over the course of the next 40 years, and you will be, I absolutely guarantee you will be absolutely amazed at what you can get out of this book, reading it every 5 or 10 years throughout your entire life. You think I'd say that about every philosophical book? Yes, that's true of the Republic as well. But this is a short book. This is an easy book to read, especially the first part. So keep it. Read it, reread it, read it slowly, reflect on it.